On a live stream, I talked about how my fiance is going to driving school in order to get her driving license. And a lot of you guys asked me why don't I have a driving license as well? And the reason is that I never really needed one. But after succumbing to the peer pressure from you guys in the chat, I decided to give it a go as well. And as I'm learning how to drive, I realized that there are a lot of regulations. There's a lot of street signs, there are a lot of traffic rules, and there is a correct and incorrect way of doing things. So I'm wondering, how did this all start? There must have been a time period where none of these regulations existed and people could do with their car whatever they wanted. I mean, after all, my private car, right? So as I'm looking through the internet, I find out that indeed, in the beginning, most people didn't even understand cars. And because of that, some really wacky and unworkable regulations were passed. Take, for example, the red flag laws in the United States. The state of Vermont passed in 1894 a law that was repealed only 2 years later. It was proposed in Pennsylvania when legislators unanimously passed a bill through both houses of the state legislature, which would require all motorists piloting their horseless carriages upon chance encounters with cattle or livestock to immediately stop the vehicle, immediately and as rapidly as possible disassemble the automobile, and conceal the various components out of sight behind nearby bushes until equestrian or livestock is sufficiently pacified. The law never took effect due to a veto by the state's governor, Daniel H. Hastings, but as you can see, when technology starts arriving in a society and advances at rapid pace, most of the boomer legislators who do not seem to understand the new technology are quick to make bad decisions. And I suppose the reason for this is that while they do not understand the technological advancements, they do understand other countries passing similar legislation and they try to inspire themselves from it. For example, red flag laws already existed in the United Kingdom since 1865. Now, these laws were applied to locomotives, and the reason they were called red flag laws was that every single time a locomotive was supposed to pass through a city or an inhabited place, and it would carry more than 2 wagons or carriages attached to it, then an additional person had to be employed. The additional person would get off the locomotive and walk 60 yards in front of it, constantly displaying a red flag, while warning the riders and drivers of horses of the approach of such locomotives, and shall signal the driver thereof when it shall be necessary to stop, and shall be assisting the horses or carriages to pass the railway whenever it was necessary. Now, it gets even more funny when you realize that most of these high-tech innovations couldn't travel more than 20 miles per hour, and that was at their top speed, a speed that was rarely used and never in cities. And it's even more funny when you realize that cars at the time looked more like this. But you also need to adjust your mind for that particular time period. You see, most horses would have never seen a vehicle before. They weren't as common as they are today, and when a horse would finally get to see one of these very rare automobiles, chances are it could throw the rider off its back, or it could get spooked and make a run for it, causing damage to the carriage. So there was a demand from the people in order to get these things regulated. There was also the problem that at the time children actually played in the street, as there were no playgrounds. And while the cars were indeed very loud and very slow, what do you do when a car starts going downhill without making much of a noise? For example, in 1919, 5 children ranging in age from 2 to 9 years old were injured when a red touring car crashed into the group of little folks while they were playing in the street on Saturday afternoon. The driver crashed into the group of children. He apparently stalled his car, but he leaped out, cranked it, and sped away, leaving injured children in his wake. This became even more of a problem as cars became faster and managed to reach 40 miles an hour. Now, most people today understand what the centrifugal force is, and they understand how to take a left turn. However, at the time, most people didn't. As an example from this article written in the Detroit Free Press of June 29, 1914, an automobile containing a bridal couple, several wedding guests, 3 children, and many bottles of liquor rounded the corner from Label Avenue onto Woodward Sunday evening and turned turtle, going at least 40 miles an hour. Turned turtle apparently means that the automobile flipped over, and the reason it did so is because it was going at a high speed, 40 miles an hour, tried to take a left turn suddenly, and the centrifugal force managed to knock it off. Now, again, most people today would probably roll their eyes and go like, well, duh. But at the time, these speeds were difficult to reach. Very few people had automobiles to begin with and had no idea what the centrifugal force is. So, as usual, when you have technology advancing at a very fast rate, the lawmaker has to ask the question, is the automobile inherently evil? The Law of the Automobile was a book published in 906 by lawyer Xenophon Hadi, which discussed the legal ramifications of new concepts such as speeding, the purpose and function of the street, and the rights of pedestrians and unprotected children who played in the street. Serious debate was held in courtrooms and in editorials over whether the automobile was inherently evil. The State of Georgia Court of Appeals wrote, "Automobiles are to be classed as ferocious animals, and the law relating to the duty of owner of such animals is to be applied. However, they are not to be classed with bad dogs, vicious bulls, evil-disposed mules, and the like." In other words, treat them the same like you treat vicious animals, but do not treat them exactly the same like you would treat vicious animals. So eventually the government decided to get the police involved, to get officers in order to direct traffic. The problem started that the drivers who happened to notice the signal of the officers did not seem to understand what the officers wanted from them and drove by, making it necessary for the traffic officer to run after them and explain the meaning of the signal. The officers had to show considerable patience. The problem becomes so uncontrollable that by 1916, 1/4 of the entire Detroit police force, which was around 250 officers, was now used to manage traffic. And 4 years later, Detroit was the second in the nation after New York to start a traffic court. This was necessary because in just 24 days, 17 adults have lost their lives due to ongoing traffic, and 8 children have also been killed by cars alone. And soon the police admitted publicly that they could not keep up with traffic and could not afford to add more men to street safety. Because of this, the city was losing the war against reckless driving. As usual, the mainstream media only added to the hysteria that after World War I, accidents continued to soar, and drivers were being labeled in newspapers as remorseless murderers. Their danger to public safety likened to an epidemic, a disease. In Detroit and other cities, angry mobs were dragging reckless drivers out of cars. An example that I could find was that of John Harrigan, a man in Detroit, a wealthy 26-year-old from Grosse Pointe who, while driving while drunk, hit and killed a city street worker. He was convicted of manslaughter and paraded in handcuffs by police in the safety parade of 1922. And while laws in order to prevent speeding and to prevent people driving while intoxicated were passed, There was no way for the police officers to enforce these laws, as there was no radar invented, and there was also no way to get the blood works done from a driver. Now, it is true that you could just smell the breath of the driver, or you could just try to eyeball if he looks intoxicated or not. However, the main issue was that what do you do if the driver drank 3 bottles of beer 2 hours prior to driving, and then he ate something which completely changes the smell of his breath? So, yes, it was a very interesting battle to regulate the driving of cars, and as you can imagine, this took over the course of 100 years in order to get to the point where we are today. I hope you enjoyed this particular video, and if you're interested in more trivia, I'll probably make more like it. It's not usually the type of stuff that I do on my channel. But let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys in the comment section.